Okay, so today is today is the first lecture day. So that means that tonight you have a quiz due. Okay, what we're going to cover today. How does that work? There we go. So what we're going to cover today is really sort of a broad overview of what is government. Okay, so hopefully, hopefully some of today is sort of a generalized review for you, and hopefully I'm able to go relatively quickly, and you'll get an idea of how fast I speak without overwhelming you with sort of new information. All right. So government, really, the definition of government is just the structures in which rules are applied, right? That's really the idea of what government is, right? And then politics is really the disagreement, right? Or the disagreement might not be the right word. Discussions. Let's use discussions. As to how to carry out policies enacted by governments, right? So the governments themselves are just the structures that rule, and politics is the discussion about what those structures should or should not be doing, okay? So the question is, first, is government necessary? The very simple answer is that, yeah, government's absolutely necessary. If government were not necessary, then we would have what is called anarchy, right? That is, by definition, the absence of government. In the absence of government, people would be able to do whatever they wanted, and that would only benefit a small handful of people like me who have no morals and therefore have no problem just taking from everybody else. Okay? The other reason that government is necessary is because government provides what are called common goods, right, or public goods. Okay? These are things that would be either inefficient or sort of impossible for individuals to provide for themselves, right? So if you talk about being able to provide your own goods for yourself, right, like you all came to school this morning, you all came here on a road, yes, right? You understand that you building a road from your house to school, from your house to the supermarket, from your house to your parents' house to their job, that is wildly inefficient and actually just downright impossible, because you would not be able to purchase all of the land necessary to build your roads, right? Plus, your roads would then intersect with other people's roads. It's just not practical. Okay, so public goods are those goods that are provided to you by the government, i.e. roads, right? Okay, national defense is another good example of a public good, right? If the Canadian Army were to invade my house tonight, even though they're Canadians, I'm still out of luck, right? I could probably take 100 of them before they got me, but that's it, all right? You look at that on your own time. All right, so how governments work, there's a wide variety of how governments work. So first, you can have an autocracy. Autocracy is controlled by a single individual, right? You can have an oligarchy. Oligarchy is controlled by a small number of individuals, right? And then you can have a democracy, which is really the rule of the people, right? In fact, that translates from the ancient Greek into rule of the people, okay? Now, we'll talk about democracy in more detail because we claim to be a democracy. We are not a democracy, not truly. Okay? So, once you know how you're going to, or what type of government you have, then you have to figure out how are you going to govern, right? We have what's called a constitutional government, right? So really, the idea here is we claim to have a constitutional democracy, yes? You've heard that phrase, okay? Constitutional means that there is a written document that provides procedural limitations on the things government can and cannot do, right? There are limitations. If you read through the Constitution itself, it tells you in Article 1, Section 8, all of those things Congress can do, limits, right? Have no limits on authoritarian as it pertains to government, but there can be limitations on other aspects of society. This is the difference between authoritarian governments and totalitarian governments, right? So in an authoritarian government, you might have a dictator, but then you also have the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church is still controlled by the Pope, and they can do what they want. The totalitarian government is where one person or one entity has all authority for all aspects of life. Okay? Even those that are outside of government. Okay? So, we operate under the idea of limited government. We want limitations on government. Okay? And some of this comes from bourgeoisie. That's a term that sometimes gets thrown around with communism, right? Because that's the idea behind communism, that those people rise up and overthrow elites, right? But the idea here is sort of a middle class, a free middle class that's capable of engaging in a wide variety of activities while they do not have any real sort of governmental authority or control. Okay? So in order for that to happen, we have to place limitations on government. That's really what our Constitution does, more than anything else. Okay? So the Constitution puts limitations on government, but it also provides for individual liberty or individual freedom. Those would be things like freedom of speech, assembly, whatever, right? And those are some of those protections. Okay? Now, there are essentially two ways for political participation to increase. Okay? In fact, there's really two ways for most of the stuff that we're going to talk about in this class to happen. Right? It can either go from a top-down approach or it can go from a bottom-up approach. Right? A top-down approach would be where government is providing more opportunity or more participatory opportunity to the people. Right? So the 19th Amendment, that is government allowing women the right to vote, that increases participation. Okay? The other idea is sort of the mobilization of the lower classes or working classes. When we get to politics, that's really called grassroots mobilization. Okay? Now this gets wildly complex when you learn that there's a term called astroturfing, which is basically the idea of trying to make something look grassroots when it's really top down. Right? It's not actually grassroots. You understand grass grows up, yes? Okay? So that's what we're talking about. The roots is the very bottom, and then it is growing up and going up the sort of governmental hierarchy or power structure hierarchy, right? The top-down approach is where these people are affording more and more people power voluntarily, really. Alright? Again, told you a minute ago, politics is just a conflict over what policies are being initiated or implemented, right? And so then politics really becomes about power, because the power is the idea of who's capable of exercising their vision or their goal for these different policy initiatives. All right? So when you look at democracy, right, again, we claim to be a democracy. We are not really a democracy. The better term for us is a republic, right? In fact, I don't know, I actually don't know if it was like at the very top of your reading yesterday, right? But the actual name of that book, right, is called A Republic If You Can Keep It, right? Which is a famous quote from Ben Franklin, but that's what we have. We have a republic that is an indirect democracy, and direct democracy is real democracy. We don't have direct democracy because not everybody in America voting on everything. Okay? I cannot stress to you how inefficient that would be if 220 million people had to vote on everything. Because 220 million people are wildly ill-informed, right? Even things that you know that are going on in life, like my guess is, all of you know there's a war in Ukraine, yes? Yeah. You know that Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine. Okay, if you don't know that, now you know. Should the U.S. be providing aid to Ukraine? If you had to vote on that, do you know how you would vote? Do you know what the smart way to vote is? Like, here's the thing, because you could vote two different ways. ways, and both of them can be smart if they are trying to reach your goal. But do you even know what your goal is as it pertains to, like, Ukrainian aid? Yeah, which is why you shouldn't be voting on that. You understand that? Okay? This is why we have indirect democracy. We're electing people to go to Congress to vote for us who are theoretically better positioned to make decisions for us. Meaning they have more access to information, more knowledge, more expertise, right? They should be the one determining for us what we want. Now, we still get a say, right? Because the minute Troy Nehls is no longer doing what we want, we should vote that bum out of office. Okay? And the reality is we should be voting them bums out of office way more frequently than we do, but we'll get to that when we talk about elections and whatnot. All right? This brings us to a concept called interest groups, and I'm going to honestly kind of blow by this. Interest groups is an entire, there's an entire PowerPoint just over interest groups, right? But it's basically the idea of people getting together in order to try to utilize political power, right? Because they have some common interest, right? Like, this is that point where I become a terrible teacher, and I tell you, you will not change the world. You understand that? Mm-hmm. Like, you individually, it ain't happening. Sorry, right? However, you could change things if you worked together with other people, right? So if you work with others, the ability to create change exists at that point, okay? That's really what interest groups are looking to do. Now, that brings us to a concept called pluralism, because this is the way America's supposed to work. This was the idea, right? We would have a bunch of different groups. And granted, we do. We have thousands of interest groups, right? But the idea of pluralism is that you would have a whole bunch of different groups, and because you had a whole bunch of different groups, they would have to compete with one another, right? So now you've got all of these different groups that have slightly different variations of ideas. They would have to compete with one another. That competition should result in compromise and moderation. Should. Okay? The problem is pluralism doesn't function in the United States. It's supposed to, but it doesn't. Right? Instead, we have a term called hyperpluralism. And again, we'll get to that in more detail. Right? So now, when you're looking at politics, how do we participate? First and foremost, there's direct action. Okay? Direct action can take really two different avenues, right? It can either be violent or nonviolent, right? Violent direct action politically would be the overthrow of your government. That is violent action, but it is also political action, right? Nonviolent civil disobedience is essentially doing what people like John Lewis and Martin Luther King Jr. did, where they are intentionally violating the law because they believe that they are morally just in violating the law, right? So if you go back and you think about a U.S. history class, hopefully you learned about, like, the lunch counter sit-ins in Greensboro, North Carolina, in the U.S. history class, right? 4 boys, I say boys, they were 18, 19 years old, right? College students from North Carolina A&T went and sat at the Woolworth's lunch counter, right? That was a violation of North Carolina state law. They were breaking the law. Did they do anything violent? No. Right? Why did they do it? Because it's just morally wrong to not allow some subset of the population the opportunity to eat a meal where other people can eat a meal. That is discriminatory. That should be a violation of the basic principles of American government and structure. Alright? Here's the thing. Direct action, violent action is really revolutionary in nature. Violent action is generally not acceptable within American politics, right? Even though you have somebody like Thomas Jefferson who once said that the tree of liberty needs to be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants alike, right? And we generally reject violent action, okay? Peaceful action is always constitutionally protected. Always. Okay? If you want to engage in some sort of peaceful protest, you are pretty much always constitutionally protected. knowledge, this is key, because if you don't understand politics, it's significantly more difficult in order to participate, right? And so then what is political knowledge, right? Political knowledge is really just the understanding of like what form of government we have, who our governmental workers or our governmental representatives are, right? Our elected officials, right? What are the political issues that are facing our country, right? And here's the thing, and I can't stress this enough, because again, if you learn nothing in my class, honest to God, like if we get to Christmas and you're like, I never understood a word Baker said, here is what I want, okay? I want you to understand that, one, democracy only works if you know what the hell is going on, okay? You need to be informed, and then, because you are informed, you need to go and participate, at the very least, by casting a vote. That is political participation. It's the simplest level of participation. It's the easiest level of participation, but it needs to happen. Okay? If you, like, tune me out now until Christmas, just get that, and I'll be mildly happy. Alright? And so, citizenship, this is the idea of the enlightened political people, right? Those people that actively pay attention. Now, we'll talk about this in Unit 2 in a lot of detail when we really talk about political participation and our beliefs and ideologies, because that's beliefs and that's really knowledge, okay? So we'll go through this in far more detail. I just basically want you to understand what political knowledge, the definition of political knowledge, okay? So a lot of today is really just sort of defining what these terms and words mean, right? The internet is obviously a positive. Well, maybe that's not obvious. The internet should be a positive as it pertains to political knowledge, right? Because the internet allows for digital citizenship, which just means that we can engage politically a lot easier via like social media and interaction and connectivity with people from a wide variety of places, locations, right? Now it becomes significantly easier to engage with somebody in, say, New York City who has the same idea that you have, right? Like, hopefully you realize that if you did the little political spectrum test, that little grid, right, that only about 60% of you turned in last week, right? If you did that little grid and you showed up on the left side of that grid, right, y'all realize Texas ain't for you, okay? Like, Texas is not liberal. Which means if you are a liberal and you live in Texas, you're not really having your opinions heard. Okay? The digital citizenship, the digital age allow for you to be able to voice your opinions, right, and actually make your opinions heard, because you can help support groups in other areas of the country that can enact the kind of change you want to see enacted. Alright? As far as American political knowledge goes, I'm going to be honest with you, this is alarming, right? It's sad to me, the amount, or the lack of information that people have, the lack of knowledge that people have. Okay, we already did this, didn't we? Right? Because, do I remember correctly? Nobody in this room could name both their senators, right? Mm-hmm. Like y'all know that like taxation is illegal. Did y'all know that? Income tax, right? Like if you have a job and the government takes income tax out of your paycheck, that was illegal. We had a constitutional amendment that said, yeah, government can do that. 75% of Americans were like, you know, it's a great idea. I just want the government to take my money. Right? Because we lack a significant amount of like understanding. And it's not just politics. And I also want you to understand, it's not like, I mean, it's probably not as bad as you would think, too, right? Because here's the thing. Anybody in this room, can anybody in this room tell me what the capital of Australia is? No.
Sydney, right?
Nope.
Oh, no.
What? Nope.
What's the first person to start with?
C.
Oh, yeah, we got it.
What? Copenhagen's Denmark.
Canberra.
Canberra. You just looked it up?
Uh-huh.
this all the time, right? Where they like go out onto the street with a camera, because Jimmy Kimmel like doing this, just showing how stupid Americans are, right? And they ask questions like that, and like nobody gets it right. Okay? I understand, it's not just politics. Literally, there's one of those where if you go to Harvard and you ask kids at Harvard, right, supposedly smartest institution in America, you ask them, what is the capital of Canada? Canada, our neighbor to the north. Anybody know? Not Toronto. I'm pretty sure it is in the province of Ontario, yes. It is not Ontario. Because I think Ontario is both a city and a province. I think. Alright? Here's the thing. It's not the end of the world. It doesn't matter, right?
Wait, what are they asking?
Canada. Canadian.
Capital.
Capital. Ottawa. Ottawa.
What is
Oh
it?
my God, it's talking about.
It's okay. It's okay. So, but here are some of the other things that I want you to understand, right? Because this matters for American politics and political understanding, things like that, right? One, I don't make you read the Brutus Papers. In fact, this semester, I'm not even making you read one of the Federalist Papers, which kind of breaks my heart. I used to always require kids to read at least one of the Federalist Papers. I'm not doing it this year. The Federalist Papers were arguments in favor of ratification of the Constitution. The Brutus Papers were arguments against ratification. One of the arguments against the Constitution was that it was not feasible to have a single government governing everybody in America, right? In 1790, when there was less than 4 million people in America. There's like 340 million people now, or whatever it is. I don't know what the number is. It's very high, okay? All right, what has happened over the course of time then, right, is as population has increased, right, that's led to more voices, more ideas, more opinions. We've also, I mean, the United States is, I mean, we are a nation of immigrants, right? Like this is a very, very diverse nation, which means people are coming from a wide variety of places with a wide variety of ideas that they already had. That also makes it sort of more difficult to govern in the United States as a whole. I'm gonna let you live through that on your own. Alright, so now we're gonna go through some history stuff, sort of as we look at like foundations of government in America, American government, right? So starting with sort of citizenship, okay, initially, like citizens was counted very differently, right? So like black people weren't citizens. Most of you probably know about this 3/5 compromise, right? You learned about that in U.S. history, right? They counted for the purposes of like representation and taxation only as 3/5 of a person, because the southern states wanted them to count for representation but not taxes. The northern states wanted the opposite, right? Native Americans weren't counted as U.S. citizens until like 1920 something, okay? Black people aren't counted as citizens until 1868, I think, with the 14th Amendment, right? The 14th Amendment actually has the citizenship clause in it that says if you're born here, like you're automatically a citizen. Period. Hard stop. Like we're not gonna differentiate anymore, right? So Native Americans, right? I mean, one, understand that immigration policy throughout American history has been, well, it's been pretty discriminatory against non-whites, right? It's been discriminatory against some whites, right? Like if you were a Catholic, that wasn't good for you either as far as immigration went. So if you were Irish or Catholic, Catholics were generally like second-class citizens. If you don't understand why, right? I mean, honestly, American government on some level it almost reached the status of religion, right? I mean, look at people that like worship Donald Trump. I mean, it's like politics is getting to the point of religion in America anymore. And theoretically, the idea here is that all of us as good American citizens should have an allegiance toward the Constitution and the American way of life. And this is one of the reasons why Catholics were discriminated against, because there was a long held belief that in the event that the Pope says one thing and the President says something else, Catholics are going to do what the Pope tells them to do, which might actually be true. Maybe. I don't know. Right? I mean, it probably was true at some point in time. I don't know if it's true anymore. Right? And I don't know that they're actually in conflict anymore, because I don't think the Pope's telling you, like, how to vote or things like that. Right? Okay. As 21st century, right? So throughout American history, there were periods of like significant influxes in immigration and then backlash. And again, if you take like a U.S. history course, like that basically happens, right? Like we bring in a whole bunch of people, and then people that are here are like, boo, they're taking our jobs, they suck. And then we like limit the number of people that can come in, and then something happens and we need more workers, and we let more people in, yada, 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 right? And this day and age, we don't let in that many people. Our immigration system is wildly complex, but we also don't have like quotas anymore. So we actually used to have quotas where it was like 50% of people have to be white in order to come or whatever, right? As demographics in the United States shift, it could lead to some interesting shifts in American politics, right? If we believe things like minority voters are more likely to be Democrats, and we'll talk about that in more detail as we move on as well, right? Just some other aspects of the majority. So religion has diversified as a result of immigration, right? It used to be that the vast majority of people were Protestant. I don't even think it's a majority anymore. One, because we've had immigrants coming in, which has led to increases in other religions. But also the United States has seen a decrease sort of in religious fervor in the last, I don't know, 40, 50 years, right? Probably honestly coincides with the rise of like religious politics, right? Okay, age, geography, socioeconomics, these are all different things that we're going to look at as we look at what this is called demographic data, right? We're going to look at demographics, we're going to try to draw conclusions based upon demographic data to determine who supports what, right? What the ideas are of America, what groups need what groups are asking for what. The reality is that the United States is so large, so diverse, that it's really, really hard to get things accomplished anymore for the simple fact that there are so many conflicting wants and desires, right? And so you might be, I don't know, I mean, unless you're hitting like the trifectas where you're like a gay, female, minority, you know what I mean? Like, there's conflicting ideologies that we individually exist in, right, that makes it even hard for us to work with one another, right? Because just because you're a minority doesn't mean that you're going to agree with minority issues in every instance. Okay, political culture, again, this is really the crux of Unit 2. We'll talk about this sort of stuff in a significant amount of detail. But political culture is really just the idea of what are the commonly held, what are the shared belief systems, right? What are those things that we claim to believe in? And when we get into this in Unit 2 here in like a week and a half, right, one of the things that you're going to learn is we claim to believe in, we're so hypocritical. Like America is incredibly hypocritical because we claim to believe in all sorts of things that we do not actually believe in, i.e. democracy. We are not a democracy. We were never intended to be a democracy, right? The Founding Fathers didn't want you to be able to vote because they thought you were too stupid to vote. Okay, all of you. Okay? If you go back to the actual creation of the Constitution, you understand there's basically 4 entities to our government, yes? There's the Supreme Court, there's the President, there's the Senate, there's the House of Representatives. How many of those do you get to vote for? Supreme Court, President, Senate, House. How many do you get to vote for? Can you vote for the Supreme Court? No, they're appointed by the President. Do you vote for the President of the United States?
Yes.
No, they're voted for by the Electoral College. Okay? You don't get to vote for the President of the United States. You think you get to, but no, you do not. Right? What about the Senate? We get to vote for the Senate today, but that required the 17th Amendment. In 1790, you didn't get to vote for your senator. Your senator was appointed by your state legislature, right? And then we have the House of Representatives. Did you get to vote for the House of Representatives? Yes, that's it. That's the only one. Do y'all understand why the Senate exists?
To keep control.
To stop the House from doing things. Because the House is the people, and the people are stupid. Therefore, we need to stop the people from doing things. Alright? We do claim to believe in liberty. I mean, honestly, even this one, on some level, has gotten comically absurd. Because we think that America, first of all, you understand America is not the only free country in the world, yes? Right? Yet somehow we're so star-spangled awesome that we think we're like the freest. Okay? We're not. Okay? And we actually don't even really believe in it. Okay? There are all sorts of instances in which people are just readily, voluntarily giving up their freedom to government. Okay? Equality, again, we'll talk about this more. This comes, go back to the Declaration of Independence, there's the idea that all men are created equal. Right? Now that then really brings up some questions as to what men means, right? And how we could write that sentence and then immediately have like a justification for slavery, right? But we'll talk about equality in a fair amount of detail because it's a very nuanced, like, word. And there's a lot of minutia to what equality is, right? And it's really important when we have political conversations to make sure that we are sort of defining what it is that we're actually talking about, right? We'll talk about public opinion, right? There's a whole sort of subset on this as well, like why we measure public opinion, what we do it for, right? Again, we claim to believe in democracy, and here's the thing, we do, I mean, for the most part, it's indirect democracy. We do believe in sort of popular sovereignty, the rule of the people, but I do want you to make sure you understand there is a very significant concept in terms of democracy, because you understand democracy is just majority rule, yes? Like, I don't know why it is this way, it's always been this way in my dual classes, right? Probably because of the way that we teach and the way education is set up in this day and age. You understand if you look around this room, there's a whole lot more ladies up in here than there are men, yes? Right? Could the ladies just decide that they get like 10 of the points from the boys on the tests? In a democracy, could they do that? In a democracy, you could. That's called majority rule, right? But our government exists, right, under the idea of majority rule with minority rights. The majority should not be able to take away rights from the minority, right? Now, obviously some of you are like, wait a minute, black people? Yeah. When I say minority in that regard, really what I'm talking about is like political minority, right? Those people that believe differently. And now obviously, hopefully as we've gotten to this point in American history, like we're a whole lot better in terms of providing minority rights based upon the melanin count in your skin or whatever, right? American government, theoretically we're conservative, actually we're liberal. We actually claim to be conservative. We generally practice liberal ideals, right? Although we claim to be conservative, like most Americans claim to be conservative, more Americans are Democrats than they are Republicans, right? Which is a slight difference. Okay? So this is, again, one of those ideas of what we think we believe in that isn't necessarily accurate. Yes. Send them. was saying, I knew there was an 8, but yeah, once I saw the name, he ain't been here in a week. You don't need to test that. All right. Hey, trust. This matters in government. Obviously, or it should. Okay. So trust is the idea of how much sort of faith do we have in America. Believe it or not, for the most part, for a very, very long time, we actually had faith in our government. We thought our government was like semi-legit. Nowadays, oh God, no. And it's been in steady decline. And we'll talk about this again when we talk about political ideology and our actual culture. But I mean, at this point, like we don't think government does anything well, right? Like absolutely nothing. And so that then also changes sort of our desires for our government, what we want. But again, there's a fair amount of hypocrisy that goes into this. And as we get through this class, you'll begin to understand the hypocritical issues that come up here, right? Because we have no faith in the government, yet at the same time, we continue to give government more authority, right? We have no faith in our government, like workers, like our representatives, right? Congress, for instance, has like a 10% approval rating. 90% of those jokers get reelected every year, right? Or every 2 years, okay? There's some significant disconnect between our beliefs and our behaviors, right? And that shouldn't surprise you because it's sort of human nature, right? Like I'm sure you all have a friend that tells you one thing, right, and then does another thing, right? They're like, oh man, I got your back, and then they go and talk junk behind your back, right? Yes, okay? When you experience that, like, hopefully you're smart enough to trust somebody's actions over their words, right? But I'm sure you also have friends that you want to look at from time to time and be like, man, stop being stupid, right? Because like you probably had that one friend that keep going back to that one relationship over and over again, and you're like, dude, what are you doing in life, man? Like they just can't figure it out. Okay? Like, welcome to American government.
That's it.
Too much?
Yeah. You got it. You got it.
So, do you, who recorded me? Alright, good. Do you now understand why I tell you to record me?
Yep.
It will be put, so here's the deal. This is what I do. One, I've had all of these. I had a YouTube channel.